True Crime Files takes cases that I've worked on over the years, and some of them involve some very unusual suspects, and they were people I worked with, and I didn't even suspect them of committing any type of crime. So they're fascinating cases. I don't want to give away as to who the suspect really is. That's up to you. That's your job to figure out if you can spot that unusual suspect. But I just want to mention that we have new episodes coming out every Friday at 3 o'clock. But just to be safe, that you catch all of the new episodes, subscribe. If you subscribe, you will be notified at whenever there's a new video available to you. So let's take a look and see if you can spot the unusual suspect for today's case. The Captain John Orr case. Well, what's that all about? Well, let me first start out by talking about the usual suspects. The police always like to round up the usual suspects because generally those are the people that you want to talk to about a crime. However, it's the unusual suspects that make it very, very difficult to solve those cases. So let's get started with this one, starting out the city on fire. What does that involve? Well, it's the city of South Pasadena. Very nice little area, nice craftsman homes, delightful place to live. It's between downtown Los Angeles and Glendale. Those are the two cities we're going to be talking about right now, just to keep them in perspective. And there is a fire that takes place at ORR'S hardware store on October 10th, 1984. It was a massive, massive fire. And ORR'S at the time was kind of like what we call Home Depot today. It was a large hardware store, and this building caught on fire, and the flame just roared through very, very fast. And they call it a flashover when the fire just goes roaring through the entire structure and catches people by surprise because of the heat and the smoke. Now, when the dust all settled, the idea was to figure out, well, okay, what was the cause of the fire? And they've got to determine the damage of the fire and the loss that was involved. And the shocking discovery was there were bodies of grandmother and her grandson was found, and two other employees were found dead in the back area of the store. Now, the investigation started out as to figuring out what was the cause. And there were a number of experts who they checked out the damaged area, and they determined it was these fluorescent tubing lights in the ceiling. Some of the employees had mentioned there was kind of a crackling sound when the lights were turned on, and that's where they thought it was. And a lawsuit was brought against ORR'S hardware store, and the victims' families collected a large amount of money based on the fact that they were negligent in not fixing those lights in the ceiling. However, there was a dissenting opinion as to that. Captain John Orr, he'd been doing this for a long time, 17 years. He was kind of the foremost expert on arson investigation. And he looked at the so-called electrical fire at ORR'S, and he said, no, that wasn't what caused the fire, that it was an arson fire caused by somebody lighting foam. And he showed this area of foam where something is ignited and it takes off. So that was his belief. Now, Captain Orr worked for the Glendale Fire Department. Now, Glendale, as I pointed out, is a city a little further north from South Pasadena, and it has a fair-sized fire department of its own, separate from the Los Angeles City and the Los Angeles County Fire Departments. And they basically handle structure fires. A lot of residential fires, auto fires, of course, and then in the rainy season they have a lot of rescues in the LA River. So they have many tasks that they undertake. Now, I want to direct your attention to June of 1990. There was a fire on the hillside of Glendale that just started at the bottom and just roared up the side of that hill, consuming so many houses. And here you can see Captain Orr. He was out there manning the hoses, but it was a very difficult fire to fight because it was on a hillside and a lot of it was inaccessible. And when the dust settled, you could see that a lot of homes, a row after row after row of home was totally destroyed by the fire. So the question was it arson or was it an accident of some type? Now, you have to get out there and you have to look. Everyone is interested. Obviously, the people who lost their homes want to find out. The insurance company wants to know, and the city as well. Was it something that they should have done or didn't do? Then the fire department, they wanted to know. So we have this investigation checking out, could it have been arson? Now, this is Captain Orr's, where he works. So he was in charge of the arson investigation. And he went out there and he found in a grassy area, there was a lighter, a cigarette lighter, and he believed that was the point of origin or the start of the fire by some arsonist who started the fire right there with that cigarette lighter. Now, okay, Captain Orr, as I said, had a lot of experience, 17 years, and he gave a lot of lectures, presentations, did a lot of training on how to investigate a fire to determine whether it's arson or whether it's accidental. Now, I had him training the prosecutors of the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office for years. I would have him come in and train all of our new prosecutors, as well as every 2 years I would have him come in and talk to all of the 1,000 prosecutors in the DA's office. And he was very good. He was well organized. He presented the facts in an interesting way. So his technique was that he would explain what are the things if you're prosecuting a case, what should you be looking for in order to prove an arson? And then he explained why arsonists set fires, and he mentioned that arsonists, as a rule, they return to the scene of the fire. And then he goes into a lot of explanation as to the various methods of starting fires where they aren't noticed and they're able to get away with it. Now, his teaching technique, I remember him doing this many times to all the prosecutors, he called it the signature method. And he would do a demonstration, and these are the items that he would put on the table: cigarettes, matches, rubber bands, some type of paper, in many cases just writing paper. And then he would demonstrate how that is done. Now, somebody, an arsonist, would go into a store just before closing, and they would go to maybe something that was flammable, such as the potato chip rack, and then they would place a cigarette with a match. It's a cigarette that's smoldering, and it had rubber bands around it. Now, this gives you this step 4. You can see the cigarette there, it's smoldering, and it has matches, paper matches, further down with a rubber band around it. So they haven't ignited as yet, but as that cigarette smolders further down, those matches will ignite. And that's when it takes off. Now, with the signature method, you can see when somebody takes that and puts that in a bunch of in a potato chip rack, it takes just minutes for it to just kind of explode. But this can be done, it can take maybe 15 minutes before it will actually ignite. So that a person could do it at the close of a store, and somebody would not even be aware of it. They would close the store up, and it would ignite after they had closed it up. Now, I'm going to talk about January 1987. There was a arson seminar that was being held up in Fresno, California. I wasn't involved in it because it wasn't prosecutors. These are firefighters from all over California and the western states. They were coming to learn about arson investigation, various techniques, to check fires out, to learn about origins of fires. And in order to get to Fresno, you have to go through Bakersfield. What happened just after the conference in Fresno, there were all these fires. There were structure fires, there were brush fires all over the area of Bakersfield. And the Bakersfield Fire Department was spending a tremendous amount of time putting all these fires out. Just to give you a perspective as to where they're located, here's Fresno up there. That was where the seminar was being held. Now here's Bakersfield. See, it's halfway between Los Angeles and Fresno. So if somebody went to that seminar and coming back from the seminar, they would go through Bakersfield. So the Bakersfield arson investigator, he was trying to figure out, is there a pattern here? Is there something that we can learn? And he's checking out, and he finds a yellow piece of paper. It was like this yellow paper here that people use for writing on. And they found a latent print on the back. Here you can see the latent print, just barely make it out, but it's not a real good print. And 2 years go by after the Bakersfield fires, and there is another arson investigation seminar being given up in Monterey along the Pacific coast. Again, a lot of firefighters and new firefighters are attending this to learn about firefighting as well as arson investigation. At the time of this seminar, there were all sorts of fires that took place in the, we call it Carmel Valley, Monterey, numerous fires. Captain Casey from Bakersfield was there, and he was wondering what is going on. Whenever we have these seminars, we have all these fires. So he's trying to see, is it somebody who's attending it? Is it somebody who is interested in it? Maybe a news media person? So they're trying to figure it out. Now, he explains to the fire marshal, meaning the state fire marshal, that he has this fingerprint, this latent print, but they can't get a match. They can't get enough off of it. Now, what I'm trying to explain here is that the Cal Fire marshal, he mentions it to the Los Angeles Fire Department. So it doesn't go directly from Bakersfield to Los Angeles. It was one in between. But LA got that information, and they are having all sorts of fires, massive fires, brush fires, industrial fires, all over. And they're trying to figure out what is it all about. So this Captain Paciano was put in charge of a task force for Los Angeles Fire, and it was called the Pillow Pyro Task Force, and it was constituted in March of 1991. And why they did, because there was pillows. They would find the remnants of pillows, and obviously had been used to ignite the fire. So that was what they were called, and he had gotten that information from the state fire marshal, and he said, hey, where is that latent print from Bakersfield? I want to get that, and I'll put that through the LA crime lab and see if they can make something out of it. Now, just to bring you up to date on that, here I am. I was involved in the Cal ID computerization of fingerprints, and here with Daryl Gates and Sherman Block, the sheriff, and the mayor of Los Angeles, I worked on this task force to develop a computer system on fingerprints. And that is what was used. And by using that and computerizing it, they were able to take that latent print off of that yellow piece of paper, and they were able to get a good and it matched Captain John Orr. That was his fingerprint on the back of that yellow piece of paper. Wow. Now what are we going to do? We have this information that, you know, he most likely was involved in the Bakersfield's fires up there. Well, there's two things that we can do. We want to build a case in which we can prosecute him, but we need evidence, we need corroboration, we need surveillance, we need all sorts of things. We need time. However, at the same time, more fires are being set in the city of Los Angeles. And, you know, do we want to save property from burning up? Do we want to save lives? And potential lawsuits, because what happens is the fire department gets sued if they don't stop an arsonist that they know about. Well, now we know that Captain John Orr is an arsonist. So what are we going to do? Well, nothing is done. We're trying to build a case, but on November 22nd, 1991, there's a fire at Warner Brothers, not at the main lot, but their back lot. And that was where there was a movie, a TV movie called The Waltons, was made. And all of that caught fire and burnt. What was interesting about it was all of a sudden there's Captain Orr. He is there saying if he could help out. And everybody kind of wondered, okay, now why is he here at this fire to do an arson investigation? Well, we needed more evidence, but we didn't dare. So on December 4th, it was decided to arrest Captain Orr, and a search warrant was issued for his house, his car, to see if we could come up with any evidence at that time. And we did. In his briefcase, this is what we came up with. Look what we found. We found cigarettes, we found paper matches, we found rubber bands, all of the ingredients that are used to make a signature fire, all there in his briefcase. Now in his car, that was the car for the city fire department, and in it we found a yellow pad that was very similar. We can't say it was the same piece of paper, but it was exactly the same size and shape and lines. Now, there were other fires at ORR'S throughout all of this time, and one of them almost took off, and it was in the foam area. And here you can see the foam, and a cigarette had been placed between the foam, but somehow that cigarette did not ignite the matches that were attached to it. All right. Now the search of his house reveals something that we didn't expect, and it was a book, a manuscript I should call it. It hadn't been published as yet. It was called Points of Origin, and it was a fictional account about an arsonist who was an arson investigator, just like Captain Orr. And it was about a hardware store that caught on fire, and that there were victims, a grandmother and a child, as well as employees died as a result of it. Almost, you know, word for word identical to the ORR'S fire. And that is his manuscript called Points of Origin. Also, when we searched his house, we got a literary agent letter. And in this letter that he wrote to his agent, he said, "My novel, Points of Origin, is a fact-based work that follows a pattern of an actual arsonist who has been setting serial fires in California over the past 8 years. He has not been identified or apprehended and probably will not be in the future." What confidence that he has on that. As in the real case, the arsonist in my novel is a firefighter, just like Captain Orr. Well, anyway, he is prosecuted federally. The U.S. attorney prosecuted him, and he was found guilty by a jury back in 1992. And he was sentenced to 10 years. However, that was scary to us. He only got 10 years, and he was going to be out on parole by 2002, just in a couple more years. So we at the state, meaning the county, the DA's office, we didn't like the idea that he was going to be getting out of federal custody, because nothing had been done about the ORR'S, the 4 people who were burned to death at ORR'S, the Glendale brush fire, nothing had been done on that. And even the Warner Brothers, the Walton set, nothing had been done. So we decided to prosecute Captain Orr, and we were going to go for the death penalty because 4 people had died as a result of his fires. So that was our prosecution, and during the argument, the lead prosecutor, this is what he read to the jury. Aaron, and now Aaron is the firefighter, arson investigator. Aaron wanted the cows, that was the name of the hardware store, fire, to be called Arson. He loved the inadvertent attention he derived from the newspaper coverage and hated it when it wasn't properly recognized. And then the prosecutor went on to say, this is kind of interesting, the deaths were blotted out of his mind. It wasn't his fault, meaning the arsonist, just stupid people acting as stupid people do, meaning those people who were killed, they were stupid for being inside there, and they should have gotten out. So that was what was in the argument phase, and he was found guilty of the 4 murders. So he eventually got that. However, when we went for the death penalty, it was a hung jury, and we decided not to go for it again. So it ended up, his sentence was 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years. So in other words, he's going to be in prison the rest of his life. Now, later, while he was in state prison, he wrote another book, and he claimed he was innocent. He had been taken advantage of it. It was called Points of Truth by Captain John Orr. But it was interesting, he's saying he didn't do all of that. However, in one of the cases, he had pled guilty to setting the fires. So it didn't really add up. So anyway, he's still in state prison even as of today. So the community is safe because it was determined he most likely was the worst American serial arsonist at all times. There were over 2,000 fires that were attributed to him during that period of time. And after he was in custody, our brush fires went down by 90%. So it's much better that he is in custody than out on the street. Joseph WAMBAUGH wrote a book about him. He was an LAPD sergeant. I worked with him for years out of the Hollenbeck station. Then he became an author. And he wrote this book, Fire Lover, to describe. And this is what Joe said about Orr. Orr had a super ego, a wannabe cop, and that's true. Because every time he came into me and I met with him, he would always take his badge out and show me his badge. Under his badge was the word police, which was always strange to me. I couldn't understand. He worked for the fire department, but he had this word police under his badge. He just wanted to be a cop, and he liked the publicity. So that was an interesting John Orr. And this is his daughter wrote a book, and it was just kind of interesting about her father. Lori wrote this book. She really loved her father, and I remember she came in and she testified at the death penalty phase in order to save her father's life. And it took her years and years to, eventually learn that he was involved in all those crimes. Now, back to what we were saying. He was the most unusual suspect. Why, to begin with, starting all these fires? And then he pleads guilty and denies that he is an arsonist. Then he writes another book when he's in state prison. All I can say is, I was always impressed with Captain John Orr. I thought he was a great teacher, a great arson investigator, but there was more to it than I was seeing. So back to the statement we made at the beginning. It's easy to get the usual suspects, but the unusual suspects are very, very hard to spot, and sometimes they're right under your nose. So that kind of tells you the story about Captain John Orr, an unusual suspect. Well, hopefully you found this Captain John Orr case fascinating. It has a lot of twists and turns, certainly a lot of surprises in it. But if you want to learn more about arson cases, get my book, PROSECUTORS. It reviews the Govan case, and it goes through the investigation as well as the prosecution. A very interesting case regarding arson. Well, hopefully you'll join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles by Ronald E. Bowers. See you next time.